Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast, the official podcast of Pineland, broadcasting to you from an undisclosed location deep inside Pineland, where we discuss faith, family, finances, firearms, freedom, food, and everything else in between, with those who believe in living free and living out the values that made this country free. Welcome to the Pinelander Podcast. My name is Paul LaFavre. I'm here with my ranger buddy, Mike Blackburn. Today is Friday, the 2nd of December, 2022, and today's special guest is Lieutenant Colonel Gene Klann, a retired Army officer with 26 years of exemplary service from the jungles of Vietnam to the sands of Iraq, and finally to NATO in Europe. He's also the author of numerous books on leadership, which is what we're hoping to talk about today. He's also has a brand new book. It's called The Iconic Warrior, which is the first book of a series of books that we are pleased to have with Blacksmith Publishing. So, Colonel,
welcome.
Welcome.
Oh, welcome. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. The exciting thing that, there's so many things we could talk about
Sure.
with you. You have so much experience. But one thing that I personally wanted to know, really is, you have this new book.
Right.
It's called The Iconic Warrior.
Right.
And what was your desire to do that? What made you want to make and create this book? What was the impetus behind it?
Good question. So the Iconic Warrior book is about a teenager, John Paul DeBear, fictional character, and it takes him, it's a foundational idea about him that takes him from a green teen to a seasoned combat veteran. It's a transition about his journey to become a great warrior. Ever since he was 5 years old, his vision was to become a great soldier and a great battlefield warrior. And that the impetus for that was he visited his grandfather in France, who was at that time 90 years old. And his grandfather, this is in 1885, his grandfather was a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars and had actually served for 3 years in Napoleon's Grand Army from 1812 in Russia to 1815 in Waterloo. And the entire time that 5-year-old John Paul was sitting on his knee listening to his war stories, he got inspired. And so the grandfather said to him at the end, he prophesied over him, John Paul, I was a good soldier. You're going to be a great soldier. And so that was the impetus at 5 years old. From that point on, John Paul wanted to be a great warrior. So he spent his whole life studying, reading, and thinking about battlefield exploits. And so, so then in 1898, he was 18 years old, and the Spanish-American War took place. And so this was his time. He signed up for the Army. He signed up for the 1st Volunteer Cavalry, the Rough Riders with Teddy Roosevelt. And this was his, as a Screaming Eagle would say, his rendezvous with destiny. So the book takes him, this Iconic Warrior book, the first volume, takes him from when he joins the service to his preparation, his training, his deployment, and actually the book ends the night before his big battle. And the whole time he's talking to veterans, what it's like to be in combat. He's thinking about whether or not he's going to measure up. And to him, it's his whole life dream, his goal is to be a great battlefield warrior. And that's what he's about to face. So,
Wow.
So that's the idea. So, battlefield.
Go ahead. So it's got the idea is historic fiction.
Exactly.
So J.P. DeBear is a fictional
character.
He's a fictional guy, but all of the history is real.
It is.
So when you read this, you're being immersed in American history, European history, all that awesomeness. So
correct.
And the book is awesome, but I think that is just worth stating the obvious.
Sure.
Yeah.
In fact, I followed the Teddy Roosevelt wrote a book called The Rough Riders, and I followed his book religiously, and I put John Paul in all the situations, to all the battles, and even to the end of the war. And so Whereas John Paul is a fictional character, and some of his exploits are fictional. But the reality is the whole flow of the events is actually quite accurate.
Yeah, so something that's interesting is, and I'll just let myself out of the closet in a sense here. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere weird. But ever since I was a kid,
Pineland exclusive.
I always thought, man, it would be awesome if I could be born like 1920.
Sure.
That way I could get World War II, Korea, Vietnam, assuming I wouldn't be killed in one of these battles and campaigns and all that, because of just the how awesome that would be to experience all the history that I know so well, or I think I know. And so, not to be Freud, but it seems like that's what you've kind of done with JP.
Absolutely.
You've that's your persona of, you really, if you could live
Sure.
all of that, you would do it. I mean, and not to discredit your own career, which is awesome, all on its own.
Awesome. You had to start somewhere, and I'm assuming you started where you started for a reason.
Sure. Well, between 1898 and 1902, the United States Army had 4 small wars. First of all was the Spanish-American War in Cuba. So John Paul is in all these, by the way. Yeah. Spanish-American War in Cuba. Then he and his sidekick, his best buddy, his best buddy's nickname is Three Ring, because he used to work in a circus and did acrobatics, so he's Three Ring. So when they muster out of the First Volunteer Cavalry, they go to the reenlistment guy, and they say, "What do you got for us? Is there anything else?" Because they both enjoyed their military experience at that point. They said, "What else you got?" And so the reenlistment guy said, "We got some problems with the Chippewa Ojibways in Minnesota. The federal government is screwing them over." Of course, I know that's a surprise, and so there's a little uprising going on there. So anyway, John Paul and Three Ring re-enlist, and they end up in Fort Snelling, Minnesota, and 1 week later, they're in a firefight with, and actually that was a firefight where the Native Indians had no casualties, and the American Army had 21 casualties. And so it was, and anyway, John Paul gets shot in the leg and almost bleeds out, and has a little fling with his nurse. And anyway, that's actually in volume 2, but
that's to get the female readers, I'm sure.
I have female interest in all the books. Like in this book, there's a German girl that's interested in John Paul, and she's teaching him German, and he's teaching her French, and John Paul's real girlfriend calls her Flirty Birdie. Okay, fine. And then anyway, there's other gals that show up in this book, because there's always some. And by the way, my wife read all these books, so they're all in the up and up. So it's not like there's any. Anyway, make a long story interesting. Then the Philippine insurrection took place because we got the Philippine Islands from Spain as a result of the war, and the Filipinos had a rebellion going on, and they were almost about to throw the Spanish out themselves. So we defeated the Spanish. Spanish left, and then the Filipinos thought that they were going to get their independence, but we became the colonial power. So they started rebelling against us. And so John Paul is involved in that. And then while that's going on, the legation, the embassies in Beijing, China, were surrounded by the Boxers, which was a martial group, because the martial arts that they were practicing, they got the nickname Boxers. They thought that all the problems that China was having in terms of starvation and bad crops and so forth was because of the demon Westerners, so they were going to get rid of them. So they surrounded the legations where all the embassies were in Beijing. And so 8 Western countries, to include the United States, sent forces there to lift the siege. There was a movie about that, the 55 Days at Beijing. Anyway, so John Paul is involved in that. So when the smoke all cleared between 1898 and 1902, John Paul was involved in like 4 conflicts. And so the whole idea about John Paul is to become a great combat warrior. So the idea of being in combat. And so, and I talk about his feelings and his thoughts and the smells, and and he always does little AARs on himself too. Frederick the Great said that experience without reflection is worthless. So the idea is he goes through this, and he thinks, okay, what did I do? How did I do? What can I do better? And so anyway, he learns, and he's always learning. You know, I know it's a cliche to say lifelong learner, but that's kind of who he is. And so that's kind of where that's from. But
I was going to go the unexamined life's not worth living. And I know
Good.
Frederick the Great got it from that. There's something else that's awesome about your writing is not only his desire to be in the fray
Sure.
and to be, in combat, but it's also the undercurrent is desire to serve,
Right.
duty, honor, country, and something you mentioned we were talking about last week
Sure.
is really what the warrior class does, and that is it preserves the safety,
Right.
security, and survival of the state.
Sure.
And so I think something I picked up on what JP is learning from his NCOs and
Right.
his commanders and those others he's bumping into is this is what being a warrior is all about.
Right.
It's about he's learning what it means to serve and to serve with distinction, and I think that is definitely something that a lot of young people need to return to anyway.
No, that's excellent.
Yeah.
One of the core notions of the whole book is to, it's kind of like leader development, and in this case, combat leader development.
Yeah.
I actually earned a PhD in my dissertation. It was a 485 page work, and the topic was leadership development and developing combat leaders. Because I've always been really interested in that topic. Because when I was in the Army, I commanded 5 times, right? And so I was always, to me, it was always a challenge, and actually initially a mystery, as how do you take a group of people and you put them on a battlefield where they could face death and serious injury, like any second, right? And so how do you prepare them for that? Preparation, how do you get them ready, the whole idea of readiness? And what kind of a spirit do you instill in them so that when you say, follow me, like the famous Fort Benning statue, and that's actually patterned after Red Aubrey Newman, the guy it was a poster that the Army had from the Philippine Islands, follow me. Anyway, when you say follow me, that there's actually somebody behind you, right? So how do you motivate people, right? So that to me, because war is the most difficult thing that human beings can face, and even worse above that is how do you train leaders to function in that, where you have to be responsible for people's lives, but also accomplishing the mission. So you have to have your whole faculties together to do that. And so how do you train yourself? How do you train your folks to be ready and to do that? So to me, that was always the special challenge. And so, you look at, good leadership, of course, that's important, good training. Training said soldiers must train for war, everything else is bullcrap. Of course, he's used a different word than bullcrap, but I can't use that here in polite company. But Rommel said the best welfare of the troops is first-class training. So training, obviously, is important. Maintenance, high standards, sound discipline. The Roman army had the best discipline of any army in the world ever. They always defeated hordes of barbarians that were larger than they were, but because they were disciplined, they actually overcame them. And where that all fell apart was during, I guess it was 375 A.D. Emperor Gratian said, I don't think you have to wear your helmets or your breastplates anymore, because the soldiers complained about it. It was too heavy. And after that, that was the beginning and the end, right? That was everything. They started being defeated badly. But the whole point about it is, all right, so how do you take these people and put them on the battlefield so they can function? Because as you just mentioned, Paul, there's more at stake here just in the lives of the people on the battlefield. We're talking about the military is responsible for the survival, security, and safety of the state, right? And if the military fails, the state's in serious trouble. For example, after World War I, the German Empire, Russian Empire, Ottoman Empire, Austrian Empire, they all lost the war. Their militaries failed. And if you look at the political, social, and economic chaos that took place after that in all those countries, revolutions, street battles, starvation, it was terrible. And if you look at the American South, the Confederate Army lost the war, right? And it took decades before they recovered from that. And some people say the South never recovered from that totally. So the idea, the Army has a big place to play in the future of the nation. And, we're a constitutional republic. So we don't have, like a monarchy, counts and countesses and dukes and duchesses, but we have soldiers. And in my world, the nobility and the aristocracy of a constitutional republic, a democracy, are its soldiers, because they're the ones that preserve everything we have.
The warrior class.
That's it.
Couldn't have been said better. There's a couple things that come to mind, and why I think the iconic Warrior series is so timely. One is just the history of it. I mean, I have an 11-year-old daughter, and
Sure.
she struggles in history.
Sure.
To me, this is the best way to teach history, because it is such an interesting story. If you can make a story out of real historical events, it's really the best way to teach in
Right.
a lot of ways. So, you're going to learn just a huge amount of just valuable history by your style in these books. But I think the other part that right now obviously is the elephant in the room is there's a lot of people that are noticing a leadership void today in the armed forces. And I think you talked about the fact that the challenges that JP is going through has got to provide lessons, and hopefully folks that want to assume leadership and step up are going to learn from these books. They're going to
Sure.
learn from JP's experiences and be able to apply them, because I agree with you 100%. The warrior class is crucial for the survival of this republic.
Sure. No, that's excellent. I was always a reader. I'm a big fan of military history. Like I said, you can develop combat leaders, the training and high standards and discipline and so forth. But one of the things that I found in my preparation for myself to lead people in combat was the study of military history. And, you'd say, well, I've got a couple of notes here I'd just like to share. Field Marshal Helmut Moltke, he was chief of staff and the commanding general of the German army for 30 years, and he was responsible for the 3 victories in 1864 against the Danes, in 1866 against the Austrians, and 1877 against the French. And this is what he said. He said that history is the most effective means of teaching war in peacetime. Yeah? And Jomini, the strategist, he's quoted as saying that military history accompanied by sound analysis is indeed the true school of war. And Clausewitz, the greatest military theorist ever, said that only the study of military history is capable of giving those who have no experience of their own a clear picture of what I call the friction and fog of war. So, I studied history, and I thought that was actually really key for me in my when I was in the Gulf War. 2 of my soldiers were wounded, but they all came home alive, which is pretty cool. And so the study of military history is pretty really important in terms of developing combat leaders. Now, one would say, okay, you're saying, Gene, military history, right? Well, isn't that antiquated thinking? Because, what does the Battle of Waterloo and the Battle of Gettysburg and the Alamo got to do with our society today, our war today, when you have, Tomahawk missiles and Javelin anti-tank rockets and drones and laser-guided missiles and IEDs? What does that got to do with it? Well, when I'm saying military history, what I'm talking about is studying military leaders, generals, commanders, heroes, listen, in terms of their character, what their qualities, attributes, and traits were, how they led, how they took care of the troops or didn't, how they made decisions, their judgments, what they based their judgments on, who they relied on, who they didn't rely on, and just a whole persona, the personality of great leaders. Because when you're studying, Waterloo, you're studying Napoleon and Wellington. When you're studying Gettysburg, you're studying Lee and Meade. When you're studying the Alamo, it's Santa Anna and Jim Bowie, Davy Crockett, and Colonel Travis. You're studying those people, and when you study military history and leaders, you're not just studying the good leaders. There was in 1836 Texas Revolution. There was a colonel named Fannin, and he had spent 1 year at West Point. But anyway, he was assigned. Was in charge of 300 Texas militiamen. And Sam Houston, his KISS commander, says, "Fannin, come and join me immediately." Well, he marched out of his post, and he got cold feet, and he marched back in. 2 days later, Santa Anna surrounded him. Ready for this? And then he took the 300 guys as prisoners, and he massacred all of them, shot them all, killed them all, to include Fannin. And the reason I tell you that, when I read that all, there was a phrase that just really struck me. It said, "Fannin's spirit dissolved in the face of decision." His spirit dissolved in the face of decision. All right. So how do you have to prepare yourself physically, mentally, psychologically, and emotionally so that when you are facing combat, that not only do you function properly, you can think. You know, when somebody's trying to kill you, that kind of affects your thought process, right? Yep. And so, can you think? And then when it's all over, that you don't come home with PTSD and commit suicide, okay? So that's actually part of my writings too. I actually have some thoughts about how you prepare yourself and others so that the impact of combat is not so, because, you see some things. Some people are in a car accident and they see some bad things in that car accident and they're in therapy the rest of their life. Well, some GIs, they see, like in Vietnam, you never were taken off the line, right? The enlisted soldiers, the officers got rotated out every 6 months, but the enlisted guys, they were on the line the whole time, right? So after a year, you go back to the States, look, let's adjust back to, normal life, work on the farmer in the factory, right? Yeah. So anyway, so I have some thoughts about that in there too, but the whole notion of my writing is to, because I had a lot of really good experience when I was in the Army. I really did. And I also, like I said, I think I mentioned before we started here, leaders are readers and readers are leaders. I always read because to me, when you're in the Army, right, and you're in peacetime, because I came back from Vietnam in 1970 and I didn't go to the Persian Gulf War until 1990. So that was 20 years, right? So how do you keep your cutting edge? How do you keep your warrior spirit? And how do you, instill that in others when you go through the grinding monotony of, garrison and the boring, the dull nature of, you run around in your little PT shorts and you do some, motor stables and pull some dipsticks, and it's just awful. So what you have to do is, to keep yourself sharp, you study military history and you keep the vision going. You keep this, the thing burning in your chest that, okay, this is what I'm looking for. There was a author, his name was Lewis Simpson. He did poetry and prose. And actually, he got a Pulitzer Prize for a poem. But this is his story. He was in the 101st Airborne, and he jumped in Normandy and in Arnhem, Market Garden, and he was in Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. And he said the aim of military training is not to prepare soldiers for war, but to make them long for it. In other words, that there's a good hua in the Marine Corps. That's kind of, the Marines really kind of do that. And so that may be a stretch, but I like it. I always thought that was good. And in 1970, the movie Patton won the Academy Award. George C. Scott played Patton, and his daughter watched the movie, and Patton's real daughter watched the movie and says, "Yep, that's Dad." Anyway, he was, I think, the greatest combat commander that the United States ever produced, and he would study military history till 2 o'clock in the morning. He would read books. In fact, he had to have special ointments for his eyes because he read so much. And when he passed away, his family gave his library, his books, to the West Point Library. And in all his books, it goes back to the Punic Wars and the Peloponnesian Wars, he would write in the margins, "That's not right. This is nonsense. This is good. No, I would do that. I know he should have done this." He wrote in all his books, right? And so the idea of studying military history, I think, is pretty key to the whole process of becoming a good combat leader. And sorry,
that made something that I learned this. And if you guys have heard the story already, sorry, but I haven't lost my mind. But I just wanted to bring out this example. I was probably 17 years in the Army before I started to do what you're saying.
Right.
I was just that knuckle dragging, NCO that just like, hey, I'm learning whatever I need to learn, and I'm just making it happen, right? Well, I was promoted to master sergeant, and I was given a position of a lot increased responsibility, and it dawned on me that I didn't know anything, and I needed to become a Renaissance man. And something that I learned, and I was just reminded of as you were talking, is not only do you become a disciple of war,
Right.
okay, we become disciples of war. We learn war, and it's for a purpose of what you've just said before, to defend, as guardians of the Republic.
Sure.
But also this, that you live out what you believe.
Right.
So you develop a theoretical experience of these combat ordeals and bloody business you read about in the books, and then in your mind you have a framework.
Right.
When you're, as you said with Patton, when faced with a similar situation, at least you have an idea of how you would do that, and actually be faced with that decision, so that your spirit doesn't dissolve.
That's right.
In the midst of the decision. Yeah.
Right. After the war, he said that he never faced one situation in the war that he hadn't thought through. Pick a number, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 times before the war, before it even occurred. He would read military history, say the Peloponnesian Wars and so forth, with such intensity, and he would put himself into the situation to the point where he actually thought that he was reincarnated. He could put himself in the sights, sounds, and smells. And
I was there.
That's it. That was the one, right? And one of the most amazing scenes in that Patton movie was he came upon a battlefield where the previous night there had been a big battle. And
Stop the Jeep.
Anyway, he interviewed a captain, and captain told him there had been hand-to-hand fighting and so forth. And anyway, when it was all over, Patton looked around the battlefield and he said, "I love it. I love it so. God help me, I love it so. I love it more than my life." Now, okay, that may be a stretch. That's not necessarily what I'm promoting here, but that's the idea, that you don't shun away from your responsibilities, because the thing is, you're defending the Republic, and nobody else is going to do it unless people in the uniform do it. And I'm talking about warriors in uniform, not civilians. We have people that wear a uniform, and that's all fine, but they're really nothing more than civilians in uniform. But, we're talking about creating warriors, people that are living, and like John Paul, that's who he wanted to be, a great battlefield warrior, right? So that was the idea with him.
Yeah, I think that's that really, as they say, sounds a clarion call. When I put my finger on the pulse of society right now, and I see the sag in the recruitment,
right?
When you see just a kind of a dip in the patriotism, and why would you do that? I mean, when I joined in '88. Everybody wanted to go be the first kid on the block with a confirmed kill and all those good things. And now it's like, why would you do that? Why would you even serve? Because of other reasons that as a society changed. But yeah, what a time that we need to circle the wagons and go back to just one other point here. Before I forget this, because I think I'm becoming like, I'm having a Joe Biden day.
No, you're doing good.
Sorry, but I was thinking about this today, and as you're talking, is what we often say in Land Nav. If you become lost, what do? You go back to your known point.
Right. Good.
So as we are like just floundering in some sense, it's time to go back to first principles. It's time to go back to the fundamentals. Go back to these books, dust them off, and warm up those pages.
Right.
And learn from the past, so we don't recreate the failures and all those good things. But what a time for us to do that. And our country needs good leaders,
Right.
bad, good warriors, bad.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say, you brought up something that I hadn't really even thought about, which was we've talked about post-traumatic stress
Sure.
on the podcast before. We've had some excellent guests that have talked about it, but not until we were talking about Patton and reading and the importance of studying history,
Sure.
did I even consider the fact that is really mental preparation. I think a defensive mental preparation for preventative medicine, if you will,
Sure.
for post-traumatic stress. I didn't even think about the fact that studying these battles and studying the experiences that past warriors had been through is really just developing that mindset for what you're getting ready to go into. Eventually, I mean, we're all going to see war. I was in the military at the same time you were, sir.
Sure.
I mean, it was a long period of peace and prosperity, but we knew at some time or another that was not going to last. I mean, sometime or another, you're going to have to get out there and
Sure.
mix it up. So I think you brought up a great point, both you and Paul, really, about the importance of reading and prepping the
Sure.
mind and the spirit, and
Right.
and really just keeping you from suffering later.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
When I would get depressed about, I would read Carlo D'Este's Pat and Genius at War. That would always inspire me because Pat is my guy. In fact, that's why I wear a pinky ring, because Patton wore a pinky ring. Patton said,
He's a warrior's warrior.
Patton said, if you couldn't swear 3 minutes in a row and not repeat yourself, you weren't really a man. I didn't. Back before I got saved, back before I got saved, I could probably do that pretty well. But after my conversion, I kind of took a step back here. But I got to share a couple more things here. You use a magic word, mindset. That's what we're creating. A warrior has a mindset, right? And the way you look at life, the way he or she looks at life, that's that mindset, that attitude about it. That I look forward to do these things and showing what I can do. Because we look at that, we say professionals, they're doctors and lawyers and dentists. Well, the point is, we talk about military professionals. These are people that are cut above. They operate at a higher standard, at a higher level of excellence and efficiency than the normal person. And so that's what I'm suggesting here for warrior. But I got to make one qualification too. People would say, Klann, you're promoting militarism. I said, no, I'm not. What I'm promoting is we're not talking about creating warriors like Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan or Tamerlane. I mean, Tamerlane was probably the biggest criminal. He made Hitler and Stalin look like a punk, man, because he would send he had his empire from Cairo to Delhi in India, and he died going into China. And he would send his soldiers in a city and say, bring back 2 heads. And if you don't bring back 2 heads, your head's going to... And he would create pyramids of heads. I mean, this guy was just a criminal. In one city, there were 3,000 people there. He said, I won't kill you. I mean, I won't, So he buried him alive. So he didn't kill him, I guess. But anyway, so we're not talking about creating people like that. But we're talking about in the tradition and history of our constitutional republic, we had some great, what I would call warriors in the past. George Washington, Andrew Jackson, Winfield Scott, Sherman Grant and Sheridan, Teddy Roosevelt, Pershing, Matthew Ridgway, who essentially kept us from losing the Korean War, and even in a more modern day, Petraeus and McChrystal, I'd put them all in the warrior class. And so what I'm talking about here is developing leaders that are standing on the shoulders of the great leaders of our nation in the past. And these are, you use the word, Paul, Renaissance people. These are people, these are people that can think. There's, we have the principles of war, and there's 9 principles of war. And I'm going to try it. And we used to use the acronym OO-SUM-MESS. So offensive, surprise, unity of command, maneuver, mass, economy of force, security, simplicity, and let's see, I might have missed one there. But anyway, so that's the idea. And so those principles of war, now listen, they stay the same throughout history. What changes is how they're applied to a given situation. Like how they might be applied to, say, Iwo Jima or Bastogne or Vietnam is different than how they would be applied in Fallujah or Mosul or Kabul, right? So Patton said that the principles never change, but how they're applied, they change. So what does that mean? That means that officers, these warriors, they have to think. They have to be able to look at a situation and said, okay, in this situation, these are some options here, and compared to what could be done. Okay, they have to be able to think through that. So what I'm promoting here is the idea through the reading, and John Paul does this a lot with his reading and studying, is that people are able to think at a situation and not just be, hairy knuckle dragging kind of belching gorilla kind of leader, that they're actually a refined person. And so one of the things that I'm promoting is the idea that the combat warrior is balanced. He or she is just as comfortable at an embassy lawn party as he or she would be in the trenches or a knife fight in an elevator, right? That's the kind of person we're talking about here, that has the emotional stability and the intellect to look at a situation and say, in this situation we have to do this, and then when the situation occurs and it doesn't go right, which it won't, if you go into war, everything changes the first time gunfire occurs, that they're able to adapt and adjust to the situation. So that's kind of the kind of person that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, combat in wars is really the extremes. I mean, you have the extreme good that you can experience in war.
Sure.
Tremendous, acts of valor and bravery that we see on the battlefield. People get medals for it.
Sure.
For rising above, doing things that are considered almost extra human. But you also have the bad, and you talked about that with some of these past military leaders that do atrocious crimes.
Sure.
And you're right. What we're trying to do, I think, for warriors is the person that comes out, for lack of a better example, as the quintessential Jedi warrior. I mean, he doesn't go to the dark side.
Right.
He knows how to handle himself in that very extreme environment.
Sure.
And I think that's what these books do. I think that's what JP is trying to, as he's going through these series. That's what he's doing. He's in training. He's trying to, as he's getting put through these environments.
Sure.
He's negotiating that and trying to make sense of it and figuring out what right and wrong is in that environment.
Right.
There's something also that's beautiful in the reading is there you have various components. You have a historical component and a philosophical component, and there's a theological component. And I think it's really important as a deep, rich theological component of your writing. And we know that theology is the application of God's word to all areas
Sure.
of life, as John Frame says. But that's true, and you have the book is saturated with the Word of God and,
Right.
and how He lives out. So you live out what you believe, and so JP is living that out. He's I raise that because
It's crucial.
these days you can have highly trained pagans.
Oh, sure.
You can go through all of the training, and you've probably rubbed elbows with them. And I've been through some amazing schools, some of the best training you can get in our Army.
Sure.
But the guy he wasn't raised right. He's got an integrity problem. And eventually it comes out. But
And eventually it always comes
it
up.
does. God makes his rounds. It comes
Yep.
out. And the guy is outed as who he is, and he's dismissed. But the interesting thing about this, and I know what you're doing, okay? I'm on to you, is you want to inculcate and pay out this truth that
Sure.
he's living out. And it's God and country. It's truth. And I think we really need that.
Right.
And here's a shorter diatribe. But often you go through the law of armed conflict briefings, and they say, hey, well, this is how we do it. This is just how we do it. Well, the law is not made, it's found,
Right.
as Cicero said. So our laws, they all come from the Word of God.
Right.
They all come from the Bible. So if you look at the foundation of our entire country, I would argue it's the Bible, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. That is the foundation of everything we believe.
Right.
And that is what, if you wring that book out, you get it. You
Right.
get that. And it's so important that here's my axe I'm trying to grind,
Sure.
is how much more would we need that today? I mean, how badly we need that to return to those first principles.
Right.
So
That's good.
I applaud that aspect, that component of not only war fighting and the philosophy and all these awesome things, but to have a sacred honor that's anchored in the Word of God.
Right.
That's so important.
That's good. I made my character a Jesuit, and what he went to 12 years of Jesuit school. In fact, his father is French, came to the United States, and he's a civilian missionary teaching at a Jesuit school in upstate New York, and he's teaching with other Jesuit fathers. Now, and the reason I made him a Jesuit was for a reason. There was a good reason for that. The Jesuits, Ignatius Loyola, he was wounded seriously in a battle, almost lost his leg, lost his life, and he had a big religious conversion while he was recuperating. Said it was like being struck with lightning. Anyway, he created the Society of Jesus, which is called the Jesuits. And I'm going to tell you, these are some serious gentlemen there. They're serious guys because they're called God's Marines. They're really good at education, and that's where they got this Jesuit mission school that John Paul had attended, and his father teaches at in upstate New York. And the 28 universities now right now in the United States are Jesuit universities like Georgetown, Fordham, Creighton, Boston College, and the 4 Loyolas. They're all Jesuit schools. But also they had a strong mission sensing. They would it was in the 1600s that Japan was closed to Christianity. So the Jesuits said, you know what, we're going to send missionaries there. All right, they go there and they be killed. The missionaries be killed. So word go out, we need more missionaries. They'd be lining up. So anyway, the reason I tell you that is John Paul has a real strong Christian faith-based value system, right? Yeah. And that is what forms him and his character. He's got all kinds of opportunities, and I put him in the book for fornication, and of course he does drink wine and smoke a cigar, and that's all good, never to excess. But the bottom line is, he never uses foul language. Well, every now and again he comes in a situation where, but anyway, the bottom line is he operates off of his value system, and that's his character. Character is defined as your inner traits, qualities, and attitudes, and who you are, how you make decisions, and how you see right and wrong, and how you make moral decisions. And so that's what John Paul is, and he faces all kinds of dilemmas and difficult things that he must take care of, and he's consistent. See, he's consistent, and I think that's part of...
and not perfect.
Well, yeah. He's got a real problem with anger because, he's part French. His mom was 1/4 American Indian, Chacopac tribe, and so and he's also Roman Catholic. And in those days, he lived in a Protestant community. He suffered, he thought, bias against him, and because of his French background, because most everybody else was English or Irish, and they were Protestants, so he took some grief about his religion. And so he always got angry when he felt he was being treated dismissively. And and plus he sometimes had trouble keeping his mouth shut. He's a really extrovert and outgoing, and sometimes he's talking when he should be listening and so forth. So those are issues that as I work through the series, we work, he's always, there's a character development there where he's always trying to get improve how his behavior in those areas.
Yeah, I also like that about, I can't remember who said it. I think it's at some point, you say something, you think, is that me or is that somebody else?
Right.
I know that happens to anybody that reads, and that's okay. But what I remember is I don't like to be around people that say, I've arrived.
No.
I've arrived. I did this, that, and the other, and I'm done now. And now I've got these laurels, and I'm sitting on them, whatever it is. And nobody likes to be around that guy. And so it is refreshing to see the guy is learning.
Right.
And so one of the cool things about it is as you read your book, you kind of grow along with this guy as these great life lessons are paid out from these various people. And so you can kind of learn along with him on that. And then, but the other thing I wanted to get out too is,
sure.
You said this, and I think we beat this, but I don't think you can ever beat this too much so it becomes a dead horse. Is you said we stand on the shoulders of these greats.
Right.
And another thing I remember somebody said, and I think I can't remember who it was, whoever you are out there, thank you. But you stand on the shoulders of those greats, and when you do, you look further afield than they did. Right. So it's like you're taking all of their experiences and lessons,
right,
and you're saying, hey, those are good enough, and I'll take them to myself. And then that way, you're that much farther along. And I think the wise man truly gets that. And of course, that's why they say, the wise only learn from the experience of fools.
That's good. So,
yeah, every time I think that it's a trove for us to always go back to and find a little bit more. Something else that I wanted to make sure we get out of this too is, we talked a little bit about leadership.
Sure.
And we, the principles of leadership, and I just wanted to know if there was something that really just stood out as maybe not from the principles of leadership, but any leadership gems, axioms, something that really comes out in that book.
Well, the whole notion of leadership is, you have one human being that the synonym for leadership is influence. So one human being influences another, their behavior. Okay, so that to me is, in the whole notion of leading in combat. How do you do that? How do you do that so that people respond to you and you respond to your leadership? Like I said earlier, when you say follow me, that there's actually somebody back behind you. So I've studied that, and this is what I considered. Maslow, Abraham Maslow, I think it was in 1943, he did his hierarchy of needs. Remember that Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Yeah. So the basic one is physiological, food, shelter, sleep, restrooms, that kind of thing. The second is safety and security. Now listen, the third one is, there's different words for it, but it's affection and affiliation. And what that is people always want to be connected with something bigger than themselves, like a good military unit, or they're Green Bay Packer fans, or they wear their company T-shirt. They're affiliated with something bigger than themselves. But they also want to, and I'm going to use this word, they want to be loved, okay? And, the Apostle Paul in that love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13, 8, it says, love never fails. So I actually wrote an article for the Center for Creative Leadership magazine, and I said, Maslow got it wrong. No. The highest human need is what he lists as his third need. People want to be appreciated, have affection, be paid attention to, be acknowledged, be applauded. They want that more than anything. And if you give that to people, and I'm saying this in terms of leadership, you take care of folks, and I'm going to use these words, dignity, respect, caring, concern. You treat people like that, and they will respond to you to the point where they may even risk their life for you. Yeah. And I know in Vietnam, if you were you didn't have to go out in the field. If you only had like 4 or 5 days left in country, and your unit was going to go on a sweep or combat assault, you wouldn't have to go out. But invariably, the soldiers who were like within 3 or 4 days or 4 days, whatever, of leaving country, they'd go out anyway, and they risked life and limb. Why? Because their affiliation was with their team or their squad or company, whatever, and they were their mates. They were their soul buddies, right? They were their band of brothers, and in the last year, they trusted them with your life, they trusted them with their life, and they trusted you with their lives. And so you spent a few days with them at the end, because that's how important they were. People would actually risk their life because that was so important. So that's what I did in that article. I said, okay, Maslow, I appreciate what you said. Obviously, people need sleep and so forth, but people will sacrifice that for a period of time for that greatest human need. And not only is it important that people receive that, because that's what they really desire above everything, but you also, if you give that, if you treat people with affection and appreciation and attention, that they will, you'll feel better about yourself. That's also not just a need for the others, but by you giving that, that verse, John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believe in him should not perish but have everlasting life, gave. So you give that appreciation and affection, that servant kind of leadership, and people, you'll feel better about yourself, and people will respond. So you ask about leadership. To me, what I just shared is to me the fundamental notion of leadership. I said to you, I commanded 5 times. Okay. Well, one of my commands, I think that I was one of the few white people in that unit. I think well over 8, almost 90% were people of color, blacks, browns, and tans. And there was all kinds of racial friction and tension going on our post. So when the smoke all cleared and I got my efficiency report, it said Klann's unit was an island of racial harmony in a sea of racial chaos. And the whole thing was, I treat everybody with respect and dignity, kindness and courtesy. I'd go and see how everybody was doing. If anybody had an issue, that was in my position, based on my command position to take care of, I'd take care of it for them. I played basketball on the company team. I was the only white guy. And, we all got along fine. And that's because of how those people were being treated. And I like to, I obviously had something to do with that. But so to me, that whole notion about leadership is because you're dealing with other human beings here, right? Other human beings. And how you relate to other people is huge. And I think it goes back to John Paul, too. He was a Christian guy, right? So he served others, and he had a lot of success. My good grief, as I write through his story, on San Juan Heights in Book 2, he actually saved Teddy Roosevelt's life. And Teddy Roosevelt promoted him on the spot, and he got a Silver Star citation. And Teddy Roosevelt was his mentor for the rest of his life. But the bottom line is, it all comes back to how you relate to others and treat other people. Okay, so I don't know. I'm not sure I used all the right words there, but that's what I'm going to share. To me, is that's the fundamental notion about leadership.
So I have a question.
Sure, of course.
And this topic has come up on the Pineland as well. We've talked about how social media and connectivity and the internet is affecting young people and people in general today.
Sure.
Different environment than what I grew up in. But we certainly had more human-to-human contact when I was growing up. And you got quick feedback if you were messing it up.
Sure.
Is that affecting leadership, or is that a challenge now that maybe we didn't have, that these young people are having now? Because leadership is very personal. It's very face-to-face. It's not, you're not going to lead anybody through a text message.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a good question. To me, face-to-face leadership is always the best. And in terms of, you see body language, and you see the facial expressions that go along with the tone of voice. And so the idea of, leading people through text messages, or I guess you can influence them that way, but that's not really leadership. It's kind of like you just put an email together and hit send, and you think, I'm a great leader. No, you're not. So I'm going to use your word. It's a challenge, because you as a leader, you almost have to overcome that. But I believe the 3 laws of leadership, wait for it, are communication, communication, communication. And to overcome that, you have to put out the word all the time of what you're thinking, what the vision is, how do you think the folks are doing, and what we need to adjust. When I was the battalion commander in the first Gulf War, we would have a staff meeting every night as time and situation allowed, and we'd have everybody would brief and their activities for the day, and I'd be the last one to brief. Okay, and I'd give my evaluation of how things are going, and what the mission was, the vision was for the next day or next couple days. And then I would share things that, because of my rank and position, I had access to certain information that they didn't. And a lot of it, it's like, was information, about things that were going on in the Corps and the division. And ready for this? That information that I was sharing with them had absolutely nothing to do with them. But I shared it so that they felt connected. They felt they knew what was going on. They felt part of the team. They felt affiliated, right? I shared that. And so I always had my first sergeants that, I had 4 company commanders, And the company commanders always bring the first sergeant, so that all that information got passed out to all the troops, so everybody felt connected. Because, I say about communication. If you have a vision for something, like being a combat unit and being successful, you have to constantly go over that vision, because people say, well, I told them once. You know what? It's the 3 R's: repeat, review, and reinforce. You have to go over and over, because sometimes people don't get it the first, second, third, fourth time, right? So the idea of, to me, to overcome that, I'm not leading any. I'm an individual contributor right now, right? So, but if I was leading groups, leading people, I would, I'd communicate what I was thinking, why I was thinking it. I always tell them, okay, gang, this is what we're going to do here, okay? This is the plan, and this is why I'm thinking like I am. Now, the thing was, I was always pretty consistent in my leadership. It wasn't like, okay, I checked the polls, or I checked the wind, how the wind was blowing, or I checked what the colonel said, so we're going to make some adjustments. No, I was consistent throughout, and so that also provided an element of security to the folks. And I also found that unless the troops knew what was going on, they'd MSU it. They'd make stuff up. And what they'd make up was always worse than reality. I don't care how bad reality was, they'd make stuff up. And so, I would always make sure, and I'd always say, you got any questions? There was a guy named David Knorr. He wrote he did some amazing research. He's still my colleague from the Center for Great Leadership back in the day. And he did some amazing research, and I think there's a real moral to this story. He interviewed executives in these companies that were going through a major organizational change, corporate change. And then 5 years or so later, he went back and talked to them again. How did it go? Okay. Now, majority of them failed. They did not achieve what they were trying to achieve. And there was some that did achieve. And you know what the difference was? Now listen, this is huge. The ones that didn't achieve their goals, they never asked any input from the group, from the folks. They asked nothing. They just said, they went to the Poconos, had their little senior executive retreat, came back and said, this is what we're going to do. Failed. The people that the executives say, okay, this is what we're thinking about doing. We're going to have some changes here. And this is what we're thinking about. We want your input. How do you think? How do you think we should do this? What are your thoughts about the whole process? And what are some good ways, since you guys are working on the line, you know what's going on, how should we do this? Invariably, when you asked those organizations that asked their folks, their change initiative succeeded.
They got the buy-in, right?
They got the buy-in, yes, sir. And the thing was, now listen, even people whose suggestions weren't used, just by the fact that they were asked, they still supported the changes that came out of the chute. Now, to me, that's leadership gold right there. That's
huge.
Yeah, it's the people. How you're treated. Nobody wants to be a castaway. Nobody wants to, they don't care about me. When I worked with Military International, I got out of the Army. When I retired from the Army, the reason I retired because I got this really cool job in Michigan. And I worked for Military International. And we would ask people when we do our leadership seminars, what's the goal of the organization, the vision of the organization? You know what they answered twice? Common response, I don't know, or to make money. That's not a vision or goal. Come on here. Good grief. And so that's why I say communication. People have to know and they have to know how they fit in. Okay, if this is what we're going to do, how do I fit into that? So that, I'm actually, they talk about empowerment. You remember that? That's a kind of a buzzword. I'm not sure how much it's used anymore, but to empower people to do things. Well, the thing is, if you're going to empower somebody and let them run loose, they have to know what direction they're running in, what the vision is, what they're running toward. If you don't give them the vision, or if you don't say, this is kind of what you're supposed to be kind of doing, there's no telling. You get people running every direction. So the idea of, I just think everybody needs to know what's going on. And I would tell them, like, here, when I was a battalion commander, I would say, okay, gang, this is the deal. We're here to prepare for war. That's it. We're an airborne unit at Fort Bragg. We're here to prepare for war. Now, whatever you're doing, you ask yourself, is this preparing me for the battlefield? And if it's not, you stop doing it and do something that will prepare you for the battlefield. Now, look, we can, build bridges in Honduras, and we can pass out MREs after the hurricane in Florida, or we can do peacekeeping in Macedonia. Those are all secondary missions. The primary mission, we are soldiers to prepare for war. That's what we're all about. We're for the safety, security, and survival of the state.
Very nice. I think those words will find their way into some books sometime in the future.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, it's fantastic material. I think any discussion, not only in your book. Your book is awesome, and I don't say that just because it's a blacksmith book, but it's one of those books that I wish I could have wrote. When you find those, you go, man, I wish I could have. But then I'd have to be, your age with all those experiences you have, and so, guys that are out there listening, you can stand on Gene's shoulders and look further afield. So you're going to take all of his experiences that he gained all over the world doing all the things that he did. So, yeah.
I got one more thing I want to share. We
Yes,
talked
sir.
earlier about John Paul's a real strong spiritual, that's what his whole value system is based on. So the night before he deployed, he left New York, he went with his dad it's a chapter 2 of this book, my Iconic Warrior book, and he went with his dad to a place called the Grotto. It's a little cave where his dad used to go and pray and meditate and think and so forth. So his dad takes him up there, and so his dad kind of does a little laying of hands kind of thing, right? And so I'm going to read a short section here from page 46. He said, this is his dad talking to John Paul. No matter how difficult or hopeless your situation becomes, you must rely and trust on the Lord for everything. And I mean everything. The good Lord is always with you and loves you unconditionally and promises to help you. Now listen, he will always give you the skills and ability to achieve what you are required to do. That may even include supernatural skills, extraordinary skills, or miraculous skills well beyond your natural ability. That is who our God is. He is a God of impossible, of wonders, of miracles, and mighty works. And remember, the good Lord is omniscient, means he knows all, omnipotent, he's all-powerful, and he's omnipresent, present everywhere at once. Now listen, that means, listen is my words, I'm not reading it here. That means he has been on every battlefield in antiquity and knows the words and thoughts of every commander and soldier on each of those ancient battlefields. He has also influenced all those conflicts according to his will. Never forget that he can multiply your ability as a soldier. He can be an incredible resource and comfort for you. See, to me, that's huge. I don't want to be so trite to say that the Almighty God is a combat multiplier, but he is a resource with a capital R that any soldier and warrior on the battlefield needs to stay plugged into. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to survive the battle, but when you die, according to Christian theology, you're standing right before him in heaven, so how bad is that either? And it's kind of a joke, but it's called the atheist prayer. It goes like this. It goes, all right, you guys are going to go into combat tomorrow. You got nobody looking out for you. Nobody's going to try to keep you safe. There's nothing to comfort you. You're kind of on your own, and you're kind of screwed. Have a good battle.
Yeah, I'd be putting in my papers to go to a different unit.
Yeah, right. I got one more to share. There was a sergeant in World War I named Alvin York. He was a real strong spiritual guy. He was kind of a carouser, and then he got a Christian conversion. And so when the war happened, he got his draft notice, and he put in for a conscientious objector, and it wasn't accepted because his church didn't promote, conscientious objections. Okay, fine. So fine, he's like a good soldier. He goes off to war, and in the Argonne Forest, he gets in and actually I wrote an article about this and had it published one time. He gets involved in a fight, and he kills 25 Germans, captures 128, and 25 machine guns. And Field Marshal Foch, the French commander, said there was the most amazing action by any soldier in the entire war. And he got all the buttons shot off his uniform, by the way, during that action, right? And he felt really guilty about that because he felt that when he went back to Tennessee, his fiancée was going to dump him and that the church was going to kick him out. But none of that happened because when he asked him why he did that, he said he had to take lives in order to save lives. But anyway, I say that because, there's people that always say, you can't be a Christian and be in war. Yes, you can. I mean, there's a commandment that says, thou shalt not kill. But if you look at the Hebrew word for kill, it's actually murder. Thou shalt not murder. And so then Apostle Paul in Romans 8 talks about working under the authority of the government, where you can bear the sword, which means use force against evil, to include in the military. Now, it doesn't mean it should be excessive. It always should be proportionate and measured, because David was not allowed to build a temple in the Old Testament because the Lord said he had shed too much blood. So it always needs to be tempered. And that's what I'm talking about. What I'm promoting here is the idea that people they think, and they look at a situation, and they're not, it's not, my writings are not indoctrination. It's something to, in fact, if someone says, I think that's all nonsense, Gene, I said, fine, okay, let's talk through it. Let's do it. But the idea is, I want people to, the whole Renaissance kind of idea that they're thinkers and not just robots.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well said.
And we sure appreciate you being in Pineland today there, Dr. Klann. This has been an enlightening episode. And we hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Pinelander podcast. And if you enjoy our content, we hope that you'll check out our sponsors. Blacksmith Publishing has been serving the warrior class since 2013. We have great titles written by warriors for warriors. So if you're looking for a great reference book, or maybe one of Dr. Klann's books, head on over to blacksmithpublishing.com. Soft News, providing special operations news from around the world. Go check them out at soft.news. And then if you're looking for some cool Pinelander apparel, head on over to the general store, pinelander1776.com. Interested in helping to develop the country's next generation of warriors? Consider donating to the American Agoge Project. We're going to be officially launching that next year in 2023 in celebration of our 10th anniversary. And we appreciate those people that are supporting that. Thank you. Until our next meeting, keep your head on a swivel, stay mentally and tactically smart, physically and spiritually strong, and socially astute. To each other, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. May God continue to bless Pineland.